The air was heavy and cold. It smelled faintly of damp earth from the fields hugging the highway. This smell still makes my chest tight. My friend Jake and I were newly minted college graduates, driven by the dizzying idea of a grocery startup and this roadside shop. Jake's dad's a 2Z general store was our classroom. It was Thursday night, and Jake's dad was out of town, leaving us to handle the closing shift. The shop was a single exposed spot of fluorescent light on the dark road. Jake was leaning on the counter, calmly lining up gum packets. He mentioned we had 2 hours left. I, trying to sound cheerful despite my nerves, corrected him. 2 hours of market research. The next hour and a half moved with the slow, predictable rhythm of a rural store. Jake handled the farmer needing engine oil, and the truck driver grabbing a soda with easy professional patience. Then around 10:30 p.m., a man on a beat-up bike pulled up. He wore a light denim jacket, his face hidden by a worn cap. He stormed in, threw a few notes on the counter, and demanded cigarettes. Jake smoothly handed him the pack. The man pocketed them and demanded a lighter. Jake, genuinely apologetic, said they were completely out, but offered a box of matchsticks from under the counter as the only option. The man's pale face hardened. His eyes narrowed, moving from the matchsticks to Jake and then right through me. A sickening wave of panic hit my stomach. His voice dropped, suddenly sharp, asking if we were making fun of him, offering him sticks in front of a friend. We were stunned. I quickly intervened, my voice a little higher than normal, desperately assuring the man that we were not mocking him at all, and explaining that we had genuinely run out of stock due to a busy week and that matchsticks were the best we could do right now. Jake remained planted, ready to stand his ground, but I was already backing away mentally. A blinding, unreasonable fury took over the man. He launched into a loud, echoing argument about the insult. His voice bounced off the empty shelves, drumming doom in my chest. We tried to explain it was just a stock issue, but he refused to listen. Finally, he spun around, slammed the door, and stomped back to his bike. The engine roared, and he sped away, leaving a bitter silence. My hands were shaking as I muttered my shot. Jake just shook his head and replied, "That man was crazy." He glanced at the clock, 10:46 p.m. Only 14 minutes left, but the tense argument had completely shattered my calm. Jake, sensing the atmosphere, suggested they forget it and just shut up now. Jake yanked the heavy metal shutter down. The clang sealed us in. I felt trapped, not safe. I began stacking empty soda crates at the back while Jake headed for the main lights. That's when I smelled it, a faint, sickening mix of sulfur and gasoline. I called out to Jake, my voice laced with sudden fear, asking if he caught the smell. He stopped sniffing and concluded it smelled like smoke. We both stared at the bottom of the shutter. A tendril of thick, acrid smoke was snaking out from underneath. Jake dashed for the circuit board, but I screamed that the problem was outside and tore for the front door. My heart hammering, I ripped the door open and saw it instantly. Flames were greedily licking up the heavy metal, fed by a puddle of liquid splashed across the ground. I shouted a panicked warning of fire to Jake. I felt paralyzed. Jake burst out, already carrying the shop's bright red fire extinguisher. We aimed and covered the base of the shutter with white chemical foam, choking the fire until it died. In the sudden cold silence, we scanned the darkness. Nothing but open fields and the black highway. But then about a kilometer down the road, near a small clump of trees, I saw a familiar flash of metal. A bike. I pointed, barely able to speak. I was terrified, imagining the man coming back. Jake's face was pale, but his shock was instantly replaced by rage. He didn't hesitate. He ran back inside, ignored the phone, and reappeared clutching his father's licensed handgun. "We are not letting him get away with this," he growled, jaw tight. I wanted to hide and call the police from inside, but Jake was already running. I followed, my legs heavy with fear, sprinting toward the distant bike. As we closed the distance, Jake raised the pistol and fired one loud, deafening warning shot into the air. Suddenly, The denim-jacketed figure, the man, scrambled from behind the trees. He threw his leg over the bike, kicked the engine to life, and roared onto the highway. The bike was weaving wildly as he vanished into the night. We called the police immediately and told everything. The fight, the man trying to burn the store, how he got away, and about the single gunshot fired into the air as a warning. The police arrived 15 frantic minutes later. As we were describing the terrifying events to the lead officer, his partner's satellite phone buzzed. He listened intently, his expression shifting from focused concern to grim neutrality. He lowered the phone and looked straight at us, quietly sharing an update. About 5 kilometers from here, there had been a fatal traffic accident. He stated that a man, around 40 or 45, hit a truck and died instantly on the highway. He paused, his eyes sweeping over the singed shutter and the raw fear on my face, before concluding that the man was wearing a dark denim jacket. The silence that followed was heavier than the metal shutter. I didn't feel relief, only a horrifying sense that Jake's desperate bravery had somehow sealed the man's fate. I truly hate mukbangs. They are incredibly annoying and disgusting to watch. In my opinion, gluttony is not a trait that should be glorified by society, and I have a specific story that explains why I feel this way. At the time, I was a small guy living in a modest 2-room apartment with my girlfriend. She worked as a publicist for a specific influencer who made a living by filming himself eating massive amounts of food, because her job required constant meetups with him. I used to join her on these visits, though I was mostly annoyed by his personality. Things were always messy at his house. It was a large, pretentious mansion. It felt very uncomfortable. He would constantly start his recordings with an annoying, loud voice to introduce himself. I was always weirded out by the setting of his home and the strange energy of his career. During one of his filming sessions, he tried to call me onto his channel to participate in the meal. He asked me why I wouldn't just come and join them for the video. I refused his offer and told him that I was fine, but he kept insisting. Eventually, he looked at me and asked if I had a personal problem with him. I told him directly that I simply did not like to be on camera or engage in gluttonous eating. He was very quick to take offense at my choice of words and looked extremely bitter about the rejection. When we got back home, my girlfriend mentioned that he was pissed and annoyed by my behavior. I told her that I was just as annoyed with him, but she informed me that he was demanding a formal apology. I initially refused to give him one, however. My girlfriend warned me that he was a total psycho who would do anything to get what he wanted. I eventually told her I would do it a day later. I just wanted to move on. That same night, he suddenly barged into our little apartment with his men. They grabbed my girlfriend and me, tied us up, and warned us that we were going to do the mukbang. With a gun held to our heads and a camera positioned in front of us, he pulled out a mountain of food that was enough to feed 10 people. Because we were absolutely terrified, we obeyed. We decided to do exactly as we were told. We stuffed ourselves with the food despite knowing our bodies could not take it. We eventually puked, but we were forced to continue eating and eating. We ate every bit of it until we genuinely felt like we were going to die. Suddenly, the influencer started shouting and pointing his fingers at us. He announced that the entire thing was just a prank. He claimed that we had been fooled. He laughed and told us to relax because he had caught the whole prank on camera. My girlfriend and I were far too traumatized to even react in that moment. The next morning, I went to the station and filed a police complaint against the psychopath. Upon further negotiation, he tried to reimburse us for the emotional pain he had caused us. He ended up paying us $200,000 for his prank. I demanded that he apologize to us directly. However, he never actually apologized to our faces. My girlfriend was given a different influencer to manage. This idiot made a YouTube apology video instead. He actually made money from the views on his apology. He was nothing more than a gluttonous, psychopathic mukbang eater. And now, every time I walk through the front door, I remember him barging in with his men. We tried to use the money to forget, but the walls remind us of the fear. I look at the floor where we were tied up and I feel sick. My girlfriend stays quiet when she sees a camera. We eat our small meals in silence now. That influencer is still famous and rich, while we are trapped in the place where he hurt us. The trauma never truly leaves this home. After that whole messed up situation, things didn't exactly go back to normal, but we managed to survive. My girlfriend, bless her, somehow stuck by me, and we eventually got married, still living in that same little 2-room apartment. Then came the biggest, most wonderful change. She got pregnant. She was 8 months along now, maybe a little more. She was glowing and healthy, but our financial situation went from bad to worse when the company we worked for shut down. We tried doing script work for other influencers, but it was not nearly enough to book a decent hospital for the baby's arrival, which was coming any day now. The stress was immense. Then, like a bad dream revisiting, he messaged. He did not message me, thankfully, but my wife. A notification popped up on her phone from the mukbang guy and my blood ran cold. She told me he wanted a deal. He offered $500,000 in exchange for 3 videos, 12 minutes each. $500,000 was an obscene amount of money. It was life-changing. It was enough for the hospital and everything we needed for the baby. However, the cost was going back into that world. We talked for hours. The trauma of before weighing heavily on us. My wife said softly while resting her hand on her belly that we needed the money. She acknowledged that she knew it was him, but the necessity was too great. I squeezed her hand and told her we would do it for the sake of the baby, even though the words felt like ash in my mouth. We messaged back just one word, okay? A few hours later, $200,000 hit our account, and the deal was sealed. The first video was bizarre and disturbing. He wanted me to eat fast food scattered directly on the floor. It felt degrading, unsanitary, and just plain wrong. It only got about 12,000 views, which made it a total flop. His career was clearly not reviving. The second video was even weirder, involving me eating while shaving my beard. Again, it felt like he was just trying to humiliate me. It got 4,500 views. We were 2 videos in with 0 success. Pressure mounted for the third video. He insisted my wife had to be in this one. Reluctantly, with fear churning inside us, we agreed. We went to his house, which was even dirtier than before. He was bigger than I remembered, easily 500 pounds or maybe more. He seemed almost molded into the sofa. The concept for the third video was a healthy pregnancy mukbang. My wife sat beside him while I stayed behind the camera. He just passed her fruits, dry fruits, salads, and milkshakes. It was supposed to be a wholesome thing. We were about 6 minutes into the recording when suddenly my wife gasped. Her hand flew to her belly and her eyes went wide with alarm. I whispered a question to her, lowering the camera slightly to see. She choked out that her water had just broken and I could see a fresh stain spreading on her dress. Panic seized me. This was it. I stepped from behind the camera and told him we had to go. I turned to the mukbang guy, who was just staring at us. I apologized and explained that we couldn't finish the video because we needed to get to the hospital immediately. He didn't move his huge, static frame. His small eyes narrowed with a chilling anger. He boomed a refusal, shouting that we were under contract and that there were still 6 minutes left. He commanded us to get back on camera. My wife whimpered as tears welled. He looked monstrous, like a true hippo. He looked like he could devour both of us if we didn't obey. I was terrified and my legs were trembling, but then I saw my wife in pain, scared and vulnerable. I cursed myself for putting her in this situation and for letting greed outweigh the memory of what he truly was. I had to overcome the fear, so I gathered every scrap of courage I had left. I looked him dead in the eye and raised the camera I was holding. Then I deliberately dropped it. It clattered loudly on the dirty floor. I told him with a steady voice that we were leaving. I grabbed my wife's arm and pulled her up gently. He shrieked that we couldn't leave because we had signed the contract, and he struggled slightly in his chair, but he couldn't move. That weight was his prison. We ran out of that awful house as fast as we could. Behind us, his screams echoed, filled with impotent rage. Getting my wife to the hospital was all that mattered in that moment. She was scared and exhausted, but she was finally safe. Soon after, our beautiful baby was born. As for the video, the 9 minutes we recorded went massively viral. It got 56 million views because of the drama. The footage of my pregnant wife's water breaking, my panic, me dropping the camera, and his screaming was a total train wreck, but it was real to the viewers. It actually ended up reviving his career. I still don't know if he will ever pay the remaining $300,000.
Years ago, during my college days while working late shifts as a bartender, I found myself driving home on a divided highway at approximately 3 a.m. The roads were mostly empty, but the silence was shattered when I spotted a pair of headlights heading directly toward me in the wrong lane. My initial reaction was one of self-doubt. I assumed the vehicle must be on the other side of the concrete divider, and that my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. However, reality set in quickly as a white Ford sedan roared past me, traveling against the flow of traffic at roughly 90 miles per hour. Since I was also driving a white Ford sedan at the time, the coincidence struck me as odd, though I didn't have much time to dwell on it. I immediately pulled onto the shoulder to let the driver pass safely, and then decided to call the police to report the hazard before a fatal head-on collision could occur. I provided the dispatcher with my exact location and the nearest mile marker. She thanked me and confirmed that a state trooper would be dispatched to intercept the vehicle. Knowing that the state police barracks were located only a few exits ahead, I assumed the authorities would have the situation under control within minutes. I merged back onto the highway and continued my commute, feeling a sense of relief that I had done my civic duty. However, that relief was short-lived. A few miles down the road, I noticed a pair of headlights gaining on me rapidly. In rural southeastern Pennsylvania at that hour, the only vehicles on the road are typically long-haul truckers or patrolling police officers. As the car approached, I stayed in the right-hand lane to allow it to pass me. Instead of overtaking, the driver pulled right up to my rear bumper and switched on their high beams. The glare was blinding, reflecting off my mirrors and making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead. My first thought was that a police officer had spotted my car and, seeing a white Ford sedan, confused me with the wrong-way driver I had reported. Wanting to be prepared and cooperative, I reached into my glove box to retrieve my registration and insurance cards. Just as my hand touched the paperwork, the car behind me abruptly slammed on its brakes and came to a dead stop in the middle of the highway lanes. The driver then killed their lights entirely, vanishing into the darkness. A wave of panic washed over me. I realized with a sinking feeling that the car looked identical to the white sedan I had seen earlier. Furthermore, I was terrified that if it was an undercover cop, my sudden movement toward the glove box might have been perceived as reaching for a weapon. My heart racing, I called 911 a second time to ask if the vehicle behind me belonged to the trooper they had sent. The dispatcher sounded somewhat short with me, perhaps stressed by the night's events, and reiterated that a trooper was indeed on the way. I frantically explained that someone was following me and acting in an incredibly erratic manner. I told her I was worried I had inadvertently startled an officer by reaching for my registration. The dispatcher asked if I was currently pulled over, but I clarified that the vehicle behind me had never used any emergency lights or sirens. Hearing the tension in my voice, she told me she would try to contact the responding trooper via radio to verify their position. As we remained on the line, the car behind me suddenly accelerated, closing the gap until it was mere inches from my bumper, and then slammed on its brakes once more. The driver began laying on the horn in long, aggressive bursts while repeatedly flashing their high beams. I told the dispatcher that I was now certain this was not the police. She could hear the deafening horn and the chaotic sounds through the phone, and finally agreed that it likely wasn't the trooper. This realization was genuinely terrifying. Moments before, My biggest fear was getting a ticket or facing a misunderstanding with law enforcement, but now I realized I was being targeted by a potentially dangerous individual. I informed the dispatcher that I was going to speed up to create distance and that I would only pull over if I saw genuine police lights. Even as I accelerated well beyond the speed limit, the white sedan stayed glued to my bumper and began swerving violently from side to side. I tried to use a bit of trickery by signaling for an upcoming exit and slowing down as if to leave the highway, but when I jerked back onto the main road at the last second, the driver matched my move perfectly. I considered driving to a nearby Wawa, a well-lit convenience store, to find safety in numbers, but the dispatcher advised against it, fearing I might lead the aggressor into a crowded area or get trapped. Instead, her supervisor took over the call and instructed me to drive directly to the state police station, which was only one exit away. I pushed my car to its limit, speeding toward the station and blowing through red lights at the end of the off-ramp as the car behind me attempted to pull alongside or pass me, almost as if trying to force me off the road. The tension was at a breaking point until the police station finally came into view. As soon as I signaled my turn into the station's driveway, the other car reacted instantly. The drivers slammed on their brakes, turned off their headlights, and disappeared into the shadows of a nearby shopping center parking lot. I pulled into the station lot and was met by 3 troopers who were already waiting outside with their flashlights drawn. 2 of them immediately jumped into their cruisers to search the area for the white sedan, while I stayed behind to catch my breath and give a formal statement. I sat in the station for a long time, recounting the details of the pursuit. Eventually, the 3rd trooper escorted me the rest of the way home to ensure I arrived safely. I never heard another word about the incident from the department. Because of that silence, I assumed the driver was never caught. Even now, I wonder what that person's intentions were, and how the night might have ended if the police station hadn't been so close.
I was 19, and for the first time, my parents had left me alone for a full weekend in our suburban home. Most people my age would throw a party, but I had a different plan. It was New Year's Eve, and while the rest of the neighborhood was out at countdown parties, whereas I'd promised my followers a special midnight seafood feast mukbang to ring in the new year, the day started with a weird ping. Around 2 p.m., while I was prepping 3 pounds of king crab and spicy noodles, my friend Leo, who lives directly across the street, sent me a DM. "Yo, who's the guy in the reflective vest in your driveway? Utility worker?" I wiped my hands and checked the front window. The street was dead silent, the gray winter sky casting long, cold shadows over the patches of melting snow. No trucks, no vests. I told Leo he was seeing things. He didn't drop it, though. He insisted he saw a guy leaning over, trying to peer through the gap in our dining room curtains. I laughed it off, as Leo, being a bored troll, got back to my setup. By 9 p.m., I was live. I had the ring light blinding me, the high-gain microphone ready to catch every crunch, and a massive spread of food. Outside, I could hear the occasional distant pop of a firework, but inside the house felt eerily insulated. I was an hour into the stream, chatting with my viewers and tearing into a crab leg, when the chat started moving too fast to read. User 99, look at the kitchen doorway. Hungry ghost, is that a prank? Lol, who is that? Spice King, dude, someone is behind you. I froze, a noodle halfway to my mouth. I turned around, but the kitchen was a sea of shadows behind my bright filming lights. I couldn't see anything. "Very funny, guys," I said to the camera, forced a laugh and kept eating, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I decided to take a bathroom break just to check the house. I left the camera running. It's better for the algorithm anyway. I walked through the downstairs, flicking on every single light. The house felt heavy, like the air had grown thick. I checked the side window in the laundry room. It was locked, but the glass felt ice cold against my palm. I went back to the stream, trying to regain my rhythm. I was finishing the last of the noodles when I noticed something chilling. My headphones were high fidelity. They picked up everything. As I chewed, I heard a faint rhythmic thump creak coming from the stairs behind me. I stopped chewing. The sound stopped. I took a deliberate, loud bite of a rice cake. Crunch. A split second later, a soft clack echoed from the floorboards in the hallway. They were mimicking me. Every time I made a sound for the stream, they moved, using my own noise to mask their footsteps. I didn't look back. I didn't want the person to know I knew. I looked at the chat, which was now a blur of call the police and run. I grabbed my phone, typed a quick text to Leo. Call 911. Someone is in the house. Don't call me. I stayed in front of the camera pretending to read comments, my hands shaking so hard I had to hide them under the table. I picked up a piece of food, but my throat felt tight and dry. I tried to smile for the camera, but my face felt like a mask. Every time I made a loud noise, I listened for a sound in the dark kitchen. I started talking faster and louder just to drown out the silence of the house. I felt like an animal in a cage with a bright light shining on me. I knew that if I stopped talking, the person behind me might move closer. I watched the chat messages fly past. Everyone was telling me to run, but my legs felt like lead. I was trapped in my own chair, waiting for a hand to touch my shoulder. In the distance, I heard a chorus of car horns and cheers. Midnight had hit, and the world was celebrating while I sat frozen. Suddenly, Leo's name popped up in a private message. I see him. He just jumped out your pantry window. He's heading for the woods behind the fence. Cops are 2 minutes out. I bolted. I didn't stop until I was out the front door and standing in the middle of the street in the freezing January air, surrounded by the smell of spent fireworks. The police found the side window had been jimmied open with a screwdriver. They also found a series of slushy, melting footprints that led from the kitchen, stayed exactly 6 feet behind my streaming chair, and followed me halfway up the stairs before retreating. The creepiest part wasn't just that he was in there. It was that when the police reviewed my stream archive, they saw him in the dark background. A pale face had emerged from the shadows of the hallway 3 different times. He wasn't there to rob me. He was just watching me eat. He's still out there. Every New Year's Eve, I stay in a hotel. Every time I hear someone chew too loudly, I find myself looking for the shadow in the doorway.
When I was 10 years old, my life changed completely because my family moved to a new house after my dad accepted a job offer. It was a difficult time for me. I had to leave my old neighborhood. I had to say goodbye to all my friends and start over. Both my sister and I found it hard to get used to things in this unfamiliar place. One afternoon, we were feeling quite bored. We decided to take a hike to explore the new woods surrounding our property. The forest was most dense directly behind our house, where the sound of a running stream filled the air. We had been walking for about an hour when a loud snap came from the nearby bushes, which immediately freaked out my little sister. She had always been a jumpy person, but I was stubborn. I insisted that we carry on with our adventure. It was roughly 5 minutes after that initial sound when nature suddenly went silent all around us. It felt like we were being watched. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it truly felt like there wasn't just the 2 of us out there. I was certain that something was hiding in the shadows, staring right at us. Then, the heavy silence of the forest was broken by a strange yell. It sounded like a screeching cat, but the noise was more drawn out and much, much deeper. This was immediately followed by the distressed call of a deer, and then everything went back to utter silence. Because the call had come from only about 100 yards away, we panicked and bolted. Whatever was out there began gaining on us quickly. In my absolute panic, I pushed my sister into a thick thorn bush and followed right after her. I was too shocked to even feel the pain. We held each other tightly in our hiding spot until we heard a deep growl coming from our right. Slowly, we turned our heads to look, bracing ourselves to come face to face with a beast. However, when we looked, there was nothing there. Instead, a horrific stench hit us, a smell like sulfur, bodily waste, and copper. Then we heard a scratching sound coming from above us. We snapped our heads up to look. What we saw would scar us for the rest of our lives. We saw a creature with a body shape similar to a panther. It was light gray with a distinct black stripe running down its spine. Its head looked more like a boar's head, and its feet were like the paws of a dog, yet it had no tail. Its eyes were a misty blue, making it look as though it were blind. Suddenly, the creature snapped its head to look directly at us, and I swear that it smiled. It was a sight that no human being should ever have to see. It had teeth like sharp razors, and red fluid seemed to be dripping from its yellowish fang. We turned and ran. We ran as fast as we could, and we did not look back once. We kept running even as the sounds of branches snapping and the deep growls and grunts of the creature echoed behind us. When we finally reached the edge of our property, the sound of the heavy paw steps faded away. We ran straight to our front door, threw it open, and slammed it shut. We were so overwhelmed by exhaustion and terror that we passed out on the couch immediately. My sister and I still talk about this incident to this day. Every single time we bring it up, that same spark of fear blazes in her eyes.
I am now a 72-year-old man. This happened long ago, but I remember it so well. The background was a series of events that placed me in a mountain cabin outside of Frederick, Maryland, circa 1969 or 1970. I had dropped out of college. My father had died very badly, and I was alienated. I needed to get my mind right. The opportunity to move to an isolated cabin to live in contemplation and solitude was welcome. To the best of my memory, I was there 8 to 9 months. No TV, but books and radio. I had a library card, and I can't remember if I even had a phone. The story begins when a month into my stay, a female beagle showed up at my door. She was a lost dog, and I took her in. Never could train her to do anything, but I fed her, and she was a sweet, if not the brightest dog. A few months in, I began to feel a presence around the isolated cabin. Hard to describe, but I felt like someone was watching, on many occasions. I thought someone might even be looking into my cabin window, watching us. The next phase was the shadowing or following. I knew the folks a half-mile down the lane woods, all around, and would sometimes visit them at night. Something was waiting for me and followed closely in the woods. You could hear it easily footsteps in the woods, and it picked up its pace as I did. This not only happened to me, but to my younger brother who visited, and to friends, and it spooked them. At night, it was out there around the cabin. And here's the funny thing. I was never afraid, never felt threatened. Not at all, at least early on. There was no feeling of malevolence. I spent a good bit of time wandering the vast areas of woodlands around me. There was a state park just up the hill, and the Frederick Municipal Forest went on for mile after mile. The whole of western Maryland was much more country than it is now. None of the development had set in yet. In our hikes, the dog and I, we came across evidence of campsites, recent ones in the woods. There were traces of fires, old abandoned buildings that had corners that gave shelter and looked slept in. Garbage, food and drink, perhaps hunters, but much of it did not have the organized feel that you would get from experienced hunters. The last month of my stay there was when things intensified. Maybe he sensed I was preparing to leave. In the mornings, I would find small, dead animals at the bottom of the front porch steps. The cabin had a small front porch screened with a light door and 4 wooden steps to the ground. A spotlight would illuminate the long front yard with woods close by on either side. Dead animals began to appear at the bottom of the steps many mornings. I remember small birds, then a squirrel, a rabbit, even a weasel one day like they were offerings. I had to grab them up before the dog ate them, and this went on almost daily for several weeks. One night very late, I was awoken by some sound. I lay in bed and heard something from the front porch. I hopped up and hit the lights. I saw that hound dog who never learned to sit or stay standing at the front door in a perfect pointer position. She was shaking in fear. She never barked. I heard the door slam and footsteps down the steps. I hit the spotlight but saw nothing. I went out. He had been on the porch at my front door, maybe trying to enter. After that, I stayed in at night more and more. The animal offerings got bigger and bigger. Larger birds, an opossum, a woodchuck. It really wasn't funny. The final 2 gifts were legs either from horses or even cows. Big and bloody. One was skinned. Dear God. And the second to last day, the dog left me. I could hear her in the woods howling on a trail following a scent. I looked for her in every way I could, came up in the following weeks, but to no avail. She left as she came. I moved back to Maryland's suburbs of D.C., got an apartment with a friend, got a job and moved on with my life. One day, not long after, I picked up the Washington Post, and there was an article about recent encounters with the Sykesville monster. It's described as a tall, Yeti-like creature, fur covered on 2 legs that would pick out a family or person and give them attention. I wasn't the only one. That attention described in the article was exactly what had happened to me, following you at night. Looking inside the house, gifts, and so on. I was shocked. If I had turned on that spotlight and seen a Bigfoot or Yeti, I might still be running, but I think I know who it was. Sykesville, Maryland was the location of the Springfield Hospital Center, a large state psychiatric hospital. It was 20 miles or so east of Frederick, and back then, many folks knew how to live in the woods. They grew up that way, country folks. I think the monster was actually an escaped patient or just a free schizophrenic who lived outside. This is like all the homeless you see in the cities now. Probably off his meds, but somehow functional and just lonely. He would pick people or families to adopt, so to speak. The camps in the woods could have been him. Nothing to do. He would make mischief. I think he liked me, but sensed that I was leaving. Now I can't prove any of this. It's just my theory. My monster was very much of that time and place, and his behavior was what I noticed in nearly every case then. I don't think he could have survived until the 1980s. The institutionalization of mental hospitals threw the mentally ill out into the streets and took away the shelter of hospitals, unprotected. The mentally ill do die, but once in a while they find their way to you. Even now, as an old man, I look back at those mountain woods and realize that for a brief moment in time, I wasn't nearly as alone as I thought I was. Even if my companion was someone the rest of the world had forgotten or feared. It was a light, rainy night, the kind where tiny drops just drift down from the sky like the air is quietly weeping. I was out delivering pasta on my motorbike, working for this little Italian joint on the edge of town. It was close to midnight, and the streets were empty except for the occasional passing car. I had one last order to drop off some fettuccine and garlic bread. The route took me to the edge of a neighborhood I'd never been to before. Not even a real neighborhood, honestly. More like a stretch of fancy-looking houses sitting in a row at the far end of a long road, one that seemed to just dead end into the dark. I rode slowly, rain dotting my glasses, tires whispering over wet asphalt. The air smelled damp and earthy, like freshly disturbed soil and pine. None of the houses had any lights on. They looked clean and well kept, not broken or falling apart, but every single one of them felt hollow. The houses were far apart. Between them, the wild bushes and tall, messy hedges looked dark and thick against the faint light. It felt like a real forest was waiting right behind their neat yards. I double-checked the address on my phone. It led me to what looked like an abandoned house. Not wrecked, but too quiet. No porch light, no car in the driveway, and no sound. I got off my motorbike, set the delivery bag over my shoulder, and walked up to the door. The driveway pavement was cracked and moss was growing through the gaps. I knocked. Nothing. No footsteps. No voice. Not even a shuffle from inside. I waited for a few seconds before hearing something. A soft honk. Just one. I turned my head toward the sound. A car was parked a little further down, near the edge of the empty lot next to the house. That lot wasn't empty. It was just a wall of dark, tangled woods. I hadn't noticed the car earlier. Its wipers were moving slowly, brushing away the mist. Inside, I could just barely make out a man with a thick beard sitting behind the wheel. He didn't get out, just raised his hand and made a small motion. He was telling me to come over. I stood there, confused. The house was empty. The guy in the car was watching me. The street behind me was dark and silent. The only sound was the distant, unsettling hum of the nearby woods and the soft patter of the rain. Something about it didn't sit right. I backed off the porch slowly, the pasta still warm in my hand. My eyes flicked from the car to the house, back to the man. He hadn't moved. The only thing alive in that moment were the windshield wipers dragging back and forth like clock hands ticking down to something. He again gave a sign to come. Now he must have said something, which I did not hear, but saw his moving lips. I stood frozen, unsure. I went close. I saw him before he could open the door. He was in t-shirt, but with only briefs. The pasta was fallen, and for a long second, neither of us moved. The man didn't say anything. He just stared at me, blinking slowly behind the glass, like he couldn't believe I'd actually walked up. Something about his eyes. It wasn't rage or threat, but hunger mixed with hesitation. I looked down at the pavement. My feet were on the edge of the puddle, and the rain had soaked through my socks. He tapped the window. Once, then again, this time faster. I flinched. The way he tapped, it was like he was trying to wake me up. I could see a takeout container on the passenger seat next to him, already opened, fork still inside. He hadn't been waiting for food. He was waiting for something else. He leaned forward and mouthed something again. Something I didn't catch, but he looked irritated now. Like I was the one wasting his time. Like I was supposed to understand. The motor in my head finally turned over. I shook my head and stepped back. And when I did, his whole body stiffened, like I'd ruined whatever plan he had. His fingers tightened around the wheel. His face dropped out of sight for a moment like he was bending forward. That was it. That was all I needed to see. I turned and ran, got on my motorbike and rode. Fast. I didn't stop until I was at the main road again, back under streetlights and around other people. Later, I told my manager what happened. He pulled up the order details, and turns out the number and name were fake, just like that address. The timestamp on the last order read exactly 9:25 p.m. And according to him, mine wasn't the first weird delivery in that area. Someone had been placing fake orders, then waiting around in parked cars. It's always at the road's end, right where the trees start, watching, signaling. I don't know what the guy wanted, but whatever it was, I wasn't going to be the one to find out.
The internet is a vast landscape where trends shift with incredible speed. It is often baffling how certain foolish behaviors become global sensations. Some of these trends are harmless, while others become life-threatening incidents that serve as a grim, cautionary tale. One of the most notorious examples is the tragedy of a deadly mukbang broadcast. Mukbang involves individuals consuming a massive variety and large quantity of food while recording the act. It is yet another weird phenomenon that captured the internet's attention. Tracy Liu is a 17-year-old girl who was deeply keen on starting a career as an influencer. She was constantly looking for any possible option to become an internet celebrity. Having just finished school, she decided to venture into digital fame. She tried many different content styles, but she failed at all of them. It was during this period of trial and error that she came across the mukbang community. When she started, she would introduce herself and announce it was eating time. Since it was a relatively new niche at the time, she decided to commit to it fully. She kicked off her new channel by attempting to eat the entire McDonald's menu in a single sitting. As she ate, she talked. Her mouth was so full that nobody could understand what she was saying. She mostly made muffled sounds while chewing. She worked her way through every drink and every meal on the menu. However, her body eventually gave out. In the middle of the broadcast, she puked everything up. Ironically, that specific instance of physical failure became her ticket to fame. It took about a month for the video to reach a wide audience, but once it did, it became a sensation. Her channel picked up views after views, and she began adapting her content to keep the momentum going. She started running polls to let her fans decide which menu she should tackle next. She invited people to request specific meals. Her channel was soon flooded with comments. Local diners and national chains began reaching out to sponsor her videos, and she accepted many of these deals. She was earning a significant income from these sponsorships by the end of the year. She saved enough money to pay for her entire college education. However, the requests from her fans were becoming increasingly nasty and strange. Some people asked her to eat rare, dangerous plants, while others suggested live animals. Despite the weirdness, her growing view count turned her into a genuine mukbang phenomenon. Eventually, she received the deal of a lifetime. A diner known as Marble Heights offered her $100,000 to consume their entire signature menu. Tracy decided to live, stream the entire event on her channel to maximize the impact. Because her audience was now huge, she had approximately 30,000 people watching her from the very first second the stream went live. She began the challenge with a fresh batch of honey-dipped pancakes and then moved on to an egg, bacon and grilled cheese sandwich. These first two meals were incredibly heavy and took her nearly 10 minutes to finish. Despite the nature of her work, Tracy made sure she stayed in good physical shape. She was 18 years old and possessed a slim, fit body that seemed at odds with the amount of food she consumed. This physical contrast likely attracted more viewers as people were fascinated by someone who could enjoy so much greasy food while maintaining a perfect physique. After devouring the sandwiches, she moved on to a large bucket of chicken. Once that was finished, she brought out blueberry pastries and began chugging apple juice to wash them down. Almost immediately, a weird redness began to spread across her face, but she ignored it and kept going. She moved on to bacon and hamburgers, followed by frosted coffee with ice cream. She then ate a bowl of clam chowder and another plate of bacon-greased cheese sliders. She ended the mukbang by drinking a lime soda. This helped relieve the acid buildup in her chest. As her viewers commented on how amazing she was, the redness on her face intensified. One of the audience members happened to be a doctor, and he posted an urgent warning. He told her she was likely experiencing a heart attack and that she needed to call 911 immediately. Tracy saw the comment, but ignored the gravity of the situation. She joked that the menu definitely felt like a heart attack. She laughed and told her audience that she was a regular at the gym and wasn't like a typical unhealthy person who couldn't handle a big meal. However, in the middle of her sentence, she felt a heavy pressure. She moved her hand quickly to grab her phone and call an ambulance, but she collapsed face down into her plates of food before she could dial. The comment section went silent for a moment before people began to freak out. After a while, the live stream showed paramedics arriving at her home. They performed CPR on her, and the very first thing they did was reach over and close the camera lens. That was the first death witnessed live. In the aftermath, the Marble Heights meal became known as the heart attack menu and became a viral challenge among other eaters. Ironically, no one else died from eating it. It was eventually revealed it wasn't a heart attack. It was a severe blueberry allergy she never knew she had. Today, the video of her final meal still exists in the dark corners of the internet. People watched the moment she ate those blueberry pastries, pointing at the screen when the redness first appeared. The empty plates and the spilled lime soda stay frozen in time on the recording. Fans leave comments of regret, wishing she had listened to the doctor instead of the cheers of the crowd. Her empty gym clothes and her college books remain untouched in her room. It is a sad reminder that chasing digital fame can sometimes cost more than anyone should ever pay.
She was perfect. Raw potential wrapped in a deceptively sweet smile. When I first found Zuyang, drifting after dropping out of university, I saw it instantly. Not just her looks, but the way she ate. Mechanical, endless, yet paired with an innocent charm that drew people in. It was rare. The timing could not have been better. COVID arrived. People were trapped indoors, desperate for distraction, and suddenly watching others gorge themselves online became an obsession. Mukbang exploded, and she fit it perfectly. I convinced her that this was more than eating, that it was a performance, and that she had something special. I made her believe she could be adored, that money and fame were waiting. I told her I would guide her, shape her, and make her famous as long as she trusted me. She did, and it worked. Subscribers flooded in, views multiplied. She became Korea's darling mukbanger, my darling. Built from nothing, shaped by my hand. But fame has a way of corrupting people. She started forgetting her place, thinking she was more than just a girl who eats on camera, thinking she had control. Sometimes discipline was necessary. Sometimes reminders were necessary. She needed to remember who was in charge. She bruised easily. She was sensitive. Always clumsy, especially around those grills she insisted on using. The fans noticed, of course. The charity donation, $144,000, was my idea. Good public relations, clean image. They saw an angel. They never saw the strings. When she started thinking about leaving, I reminded her of reality. I let her understand what would happen if certain private moments were exposed. I made sure she imagined the shame, her family, her fans, the collapse of everything she had. Fear bloomed exactly as expected. She stayed, she smiled, she obeyed. She needed structure, so I created it, an agency, my agency. I framed it as professionalism, contracts, management, protection from stress. I handled the deals. She focused on eating. A 70-30 split in my favor was fair. I built everything. She hesitated, but she signed. She always did in the end. The money poured in, $3 million. My rightful share earned. Then the parasites appeared, cyber wreckers, bottom feeders like Jay, Din, and Caracula, desperate to attach themselves to real success. Akura, an idiot and supposedly Jay's friend, got hold of a useless recording. Gossip about her past, hostess bar trash, a tax issue I was managing, a sponsorship deal I negotiated. They thought they could blackmail my asset. Amateurs. Jay and Din tried for a pathetic $7,000. I had already secured a proper management fee of $40,000. They didn't understand the game. Akura didn't bury it. He handed it to Pan, another wrecker trying to clean up his friend's involvement in the old Mary Yang 44 mess. Pan passed it to Kim, a self-righteous hypocrite chasing attention. Kim saw an opportunity and leaked everything. My business, my life. The narrative flipped overnight. The internet turned. Questions spread. Her past, the hostess bar, taxes. Suddenly, I was the villain. All because she couldn't keep her past buried, and vultures wanted their cut. Then she went live, July 11th. Tears, a carefully spun story. 4 years of abuse, she claimed. Sexual assault, extortion, illegal filming, financial exploitation. All lies. Discipline reframed as cruelty. Structure twisted into crimes. She tried to destroy me. The contract was fair. The recordings were necessary. The leverage was necessary. After everything I did for her, she turned on me. Then came the lawsuit. Claims of unpaid earnings and contract termination. Everything was written clearly, yet they ignored it. They played an audio clip. Sounds ripped from context. A slammed door, muffled screams, my voice distorted into something monstrous. They cornered me. Media. Public opinion. Her lawyers with their so-called evidence. Thousands of recordings. Thousands of photos. It didn't matter how they got them. The damage was done. My agency, my reputation, my money, all threatened. all because of her. She couldn't handle the life I gave her. Ungrateful. They wanted a monster. They pushed me into it. Fine. Let them pick through the wreckage. But they should know this was never my fault. It was always hers. She pushed me to this. They all did. My only regret? Maybe I should have controlled her better from the very beginning.
After the story ends, I want you to hear this from me. I know he tried to control the narrative and share his own version of events. For a long time, people only heard his side. Behind the camera, my manager, who was also my ex-boyfriend, controlled me. He took most of my earnings and used private recordings to keep me afraid. When I went live, it wasn't a breakdown. It was me telling the truth. With help, I released 3,800 files that exposed everything. This is where the story really ends, with the truth, and with me choosing myself.
I grew up in the 80s in this little town called Durant, which is about 6 miles east of Brandon, Florida. Until I was 15 years old, my best friends in the world were these two little kids, Bobby and Joey. We were basically inseparable. Not only did we go to the same elementary and middle schools, but we spent all of our free time together. Bobby and Joey were like opposites. Like it was weird that we were even friends to begin with. Bobby was more outgoing, while Joey was more reserved. Bobby would eat just about anything, while Joey was easily the fanciest eater I've ever known. It extended to almost everything, including how scary they found horror movies. And boy, do we love horror movies. We tried just about every trick in the book to sneak into the theaters, to watch The Thing or Nightmare on Elm Street. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes not. But when we did get in, the result was always the same. Joey would be on the verge of a panic attack for the entire show, while Bobby would be complaining about how it all looked fake or how it wasn't scary enough for him. Nothing seemed to be able to freak him out. Not even the transformation scene in The American Werewolf in London. He was impressed. Sure, Kanan is the least bit grossed out or whatever. And I suppose that's why we thought the haunted house or the traveling fair wouldn't scare him either. It was late August of 1985 when the traveling fair came to town, and seeing nothing good was showing down at the local movie theater, we figured we'd stop by to see what it was all about. It was all the usual stuff. Cotton candy, fairground rides, BB shooting galleries, etc. But the thing that caught our attention was the haunted house. Virginia Beach Traveling Fair looked pretty cool, and was certainly more of an attractive prospect than the carousel. So after finishing a hot dog, we headed over to the ticket booth to ask them how much. I remember the guy in the booth. He had all the skeletal face paint on, and when we asked him for 3 tickets, he put on the spooky voice like, "Are you sure you boys have the constitution for such a terrible trial?" We were just like, "Yeah, dude, just give us the tickets already." We walk up towards the entrance to go inside. So the way this thing was laid out was like a giant box room that had been divided up into corridors. You made your way through the various corridors, some which narrowed so you had to squeeze through them, and ever so often, a mechanical doodad would jump out to scare you, or an actual person. I'll admit, the actual people, one of which had on a pretty cool Wolfman mask, are pretty creepy, especially the woman who pretended to be a statue right up until we tried to pass her, and she touched my shoulder, and it almost gave me a heart attack in the process. Got to applaud that level of commitment and subtlety, right? Anyway, Joey and I thought it was pretty cool, even though he was so scared he was ready to puke. But Bobby thought the whole thing was done. So much so that he walked right up to the ticket vendor and demanded his money back. Of course, the guy just points to a little sign that says, "No refunds." But he does so in such a dismissive way that Bobby just about explodes. He started ranting about how it is the worst haunted house he'd ever been to, and that no one in their right mind should ever pay for anything so terrible. The guy talks to us for a minute or two, lowers his voice, and says something that seemed to calm Bobby down. Then when he walks back to us, we found out that this is what the guy had to say. "If you want to see something scary in there, come back later at around 10 p.m. If you're still not satisfied, we'll give you your money back. It seemed sketchy to say the least, but Bobby assured us that the guy was serious, and somehow we got into our heads that we were beginning to see the adult in the house. Bearing in mind, we were kids who had trouble getting into our rated movies, so I don't think I could underestimate how excited we were. We heard that traveling carnivals were known to get a little risque after dark, so the prospect of getting to see that sort of thing in action felt like a real adventure. Joy and I had a curfew at 9 p.m., but we got around it by saying we were staying at Bobby's. Only Bobby's mom worked as a night nurse on weekends, so there'd be no one around to disprove that. It was a foolproof plan. At least, it seemed that way for a while. But as a matter of fact, our little visit to the carnival would end our friendship and change our lives forever. The first time that something was wrong was when we showed up and the whole place seemed to be closed down. There were lights on here and there, a few workers wandering around, carrying heavy-looking tools, but other than that, the place was deserted. At first, I figured the guy just played a trick on us, as in, come back later, but I'll be long gone. But Bobby was determined to get his money back, and we followed him through the carnival grounds until we came across the haunted house. True to his word, the ticket teller was sitting on the steel chairs that led up to the entrance. He made some comment about being surprised, which showed us how he figured we were too chicken to come back for the midnight show, as he called it. We just laughed. Midnight show. It wasn't a minute past 10 p.m., and there he was trying to be all spooky again. But then, Bobby asked him what was so scary about the midnight show, and if he'd be given a refund if it didn't frighten him. Again, the guy promises, if it doesn't spook him, he gets his money back. But what he said next really set me on edge, and immediately had me thinking twice about my decision to return. He started by saying how the carnival didn't like leaving paying visitors unhappy, and if we wanted to be scared, he could show us something that had to leave us very frightened indeed. He said it was something to keep in reserve for those dissatisfied with the haunted house, something that very few have come to witness without losing their sanity altogether. He said only a small, dedicated crew handles the midnight show because the sheer psychological strain of the performance can be extremely harmful to their mental health. I remember Bobby piping up like, I'm not dumb, dude. I see what you're doing. He's just gonna beat the snot out of us when we get in here as payback for talking smack. The guy laughed, then swore on his mother's grave that each of us would walk in on our own volition and walk out unharmed. As for our sanity, he couldn't guarantee it would still be in one piece by the end. Joey was out from the word go. He's like, nope, screw this, I'm not going in. Bobby, on the other hand, was typical Bobby. I don't think wild horses could have dragged him away from that carnival. But for me, there was something about the way the ticket vendor was talking. He wasn't trying to sound scary or be scary. He actually sounded kind of scared himself, almost like he didn't want us to go in. And either he was an Oscar-level acting talent, or there was really something to what he was saying. I'll never forget the way Bobby looked at me when I said, yeah, I'm good. Actually, I think I'll stay here with Joey. It was like disgust mixed with ridicule. I know for a fact he thought I was being a big baby for having let the carny dude psych me out, but I made up my mind, and I wasn't going to budge. In the end, Bobby went down on his own. Well, Joey and I waited for him outside. I could tell he felt a little nervous walking in, but I was nervous too. I was nervous for him, because as much as we'd been reassured that nothing was going to happen to him, a little piece of me thought Bobby was going to get his bell rang as soon as he walked in. Me and Joker outside for maybe 10 to 15 minutes waiting for Bobby while wondering what could be going on in that haunted house. There wasn't any noise or anything, and our walk through in the daytime had taken like 5 minutes tops. So when 20 to 25 to 30 minutes went by, we started to get pretty freaking worried for Bobby. Only right when we were about to go banging on the door of the haunted house, Bobby reappears with no limps, no swelling, and no bleeding. He looked okay, but he wasn't, and I'm not sure Bobby was ever really okay again. I remember walking back to his mom's place like it was yesterday, the exasperation I felt when we asked Bobby what happened, and all he said was nothing. We were flabbergasted. It certainly didn't seem like nothing had happened, because Bobby was definitely shaken up by something. At first, he was pale, visibly shaken, and he had this kind of vacant expression on his face. It's hard to explain. He seemed mostly shocked by whatever it was he had just seen, but he was definitely disturbed too. We kept begging him to tell us what he'd seen, but he just wouldn't say. All he gave us was nothing. Stop asking about it. We asked him if it was scary, and he said yes, but he denied any kind of violence had occurred. The guy promised he wouldn't be touched, and he'd apparently been true to his word on that, too. But that didn't mean they hadn't done something to Bobby. And despite all his denials, I know that was the case. The last thing he said about it before he threatened to kick us out of his mom's house, if we asked again, was a couple of hours later, when Joy broke down and asked him, "Dude, I'm begging you, at least give us a clue what happened in there." "Something that doesn't make sense," Bobby replied. He never talked about it again. I know that seems unbelievable, but time moves pretty fast at that age. We were due to start our junior year of high school. I started dating that first semester. Joey broke his arm on Bobby's skateboard that winter, and there was other stuff to think about. I'm not saying we just forgot about it. And it came up in conversation once or twice in the months that followed, but every time we brought it up, Bobby would just give us this look, and the one time we persisted, he just walked back home without a word and didn't return our calls for a week. I'd like to say that dropping the subject for good repaired our friendship, but it didn't. Like I might have said earlier, what happened that night was the beginning of the end of our little friendship triangle, and we slowly began to drift apart. The end of the end, if that makes any sense, was when Bobby and his mom moved out to New Hampshire for her new job. We all promised we'd keep in touch, but we never did. And I think Joey and I just bummed each other out after that, and we were wondering what happened to Bobby, always hoping he'd call someday, but he didn't call, and we didn't even get the number for his new place. I still think about Bobby an awful lot, and I still think about him saying something that didn't make any sense. I've racked my dumb brain for literally decades, but I just can't work out what he meant by that. My wife thinks he was lying, and that those carnival workers really did lay hands on him or something. Just because he didn't have any cuts or bruises doesn't mean they didn't slap him around or threaten him a little. And besides, you can do a lot worse things to someone without leaving a black eye or a bruised lip. I sometimes wonder if that really is true. What would happen to him that was so traumatic that he just couldn't deal with it? Bobby was a brave man. I think he was the bravest and most defiant person I've ever known. If the tough thing needed doing, Bobby did it. And I think that if that thing just so happened to be opening up about being hurt or something, Bobby would have done it maybe later than rather sooner. But he would have, and I think I'll just end it there. Whenever I talk about Bobby, every third word out of my mouth is maybe. I'm so sick of maybes I can barely even describe it. I just hope his story isn't over yet. But he's out there somewhere, living a happy, fruitful life. I tried to look for him on Facebook ever so often, just to see if he made an account or something, but I've had no luck as of yet. But maybe next week, or maybe next year, I'll finally find out what happened to Bobby, and get to say hello to an old friend in the process. Maybe, just maybe.
I should probably begin by making it absolutely clear that I am not one of those paranormal obsessed ghost hunting loons who thinks every speck of dust in a photo is an orb. If I tell you that one of my favorite television programs is Penn and Teller's Bees, the show where they spend 40 minutes debunking nonsense conspiracy theories and fake psychics, then you probably have a very good idea of the kind of person I am. For the vast majority of my adult life, I moved through the world firmly believing that science and logic could account for every single occurrence in the universe. I believed the only restrictions on our understanding were the temporary limits of human knowledge. That was my worldview until something happened to me that I genuinely cannot explain through any conventional means. No matter how hard I have tried to rationalize it, I have never been able to come up with a legitimate, logical explanation for that night. The entire event freaked me out to such an extreme degree that it triggered a sort of hyperfixation in me that lasted for several months. I became so obsessed with finding an answer that even my most rational, skeptic friends started to worry that I was actually losing my mind. But I know for a fact that I haven't lost my mind. It really happened. Regardless of how many people try to tell me that it was just a trick of the light or my mind playing games due to exhaustion, I know exactly what I saw. It was an experience that effectively put the fear of God into me. To set the scene, we have to go back to the early spring of 2017. In the Northeast, that is the time of year when the sun still sets quite early and the air carries a lingering, sharp chill. It was approximately 9 p.m., and I was making the drive back to Narragansett from a friend's house in Newport. I decided to take a shortcut through Saunderstown to save some time. By that point in my life, I had done that specific drive at least 100 times. I felt so familiar with the roads that I joked I could navigate them with my eyes closed if I really had to. However, that sense of self-assured cockiness was likely my downfall. It had gotten me into trouble before, and it did so again that night. Somewhere halfway through the journey, I must have completely switched off mentally. I missed my turn and took a wrong one instead. Before I realized what was happening, I found myself pulling into a quiet, residential cul-de-sac to make a complete U-turn. I was so embarrassingly lost that I actually had to reach for my phone to pull up Google Maps. I checked my GPS position and mentally noted the series of turns I needed to make to get back toward the highway. I started to pull away from the curb and put my phone back in the center console when suddenly, there was a car directly in front of me. I slammed on my brakes with such force that the seatbelt locked against my chest. I let out a loud string of curse words, bracing myself for the inevitable sound of a blaring horn or a frustrated driver shouting at me. I immediately began mouthing apologies through the windshield, taking my hands off the steering wheel to gesture to the other driver. I silently signaled that I was sorry and that it was entirely my fault. As I was doing this, I noticed something incredibly unusual about the vehicle blocking my path. It was a legitimate museum-quality classic car. It wasn't just some 1970s muscle car like a Camaro. This was a Buick from the late 1930s or early 1940s. It was the exact kind of vehicle one would expect to see a high-ranking mobster like Al Capone stepping out of in Prohibition-era Chicago. The car was in pristine condition, appearing crisp and brand new. Whoever owned it must have poured an incredible amount of money and labor into the restoration, because every inch of it looked flawless under the streetlights. I suddenly realized that while I was busy admiring this vintage machine, I was still physically blocking the man's path. I put my car in reverse and gave the driver a friendly, nice car thumbs up, even pointing toward the polished hood of his Buick. The man did not react at all. Throughout the entire interaction, he simply sat there, staring and smiling at me through his windshield. As I began backing up to give him enough room to pass, I noticed that he looked remarkably like an old ventriloquist's dummy. There was something about the way his hair sat, or perhaps the waxy pale texture of his skin, that triggered that unsettling association in my brain. Then, just as I was about to give him enough space to drive around me, my car completely died. The engine cut out. The battery failed, and every light on my dashboard went dark. I began to jiggle the keys in the ignition with increasing panic, because I felt like a total idiot breaking down right in front of this man and his beautiful car. Nothing happened. The lights wouldn't flicker on, and the engine wouldn't even attempt to turn over. My first thought was sheer frustration, wondering why my battery would choose this exact moment to give up on me. My car was a bit of a junker back then. So while the timing was terrible, a mechanical failure wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility. However, I was still obstructing the Buick driver, who I assumed was getting incredibly angry after sitting there for several minutes. I rolled my window down manually, leaned out into the cold air, and began yelling to the man. I told him that my car was dead and that he would have to try to maneuver around me. He didn't respond or acknowledge me in any way. Instead, I began to hear a very faint, creepy style of old music drifting from his car. I couldn't see his face anymore because his high-beam headlights were blinding me. He remained silent, and that strange song began to make the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Recalling this part of the story always causes a spike in my anxiety. As the situation evolved into a strange standoff, I sat in my driver's seat, wondering why the man wouldn't speak or move. I didn't want to honk my horn because the encounter had been polite up until that point. I just sat there in the silence, waiting and feeling a growing sense of dread. That was when the lights on my dashboard began to flicker weakly. I felt a surge of hope, thinking my battery might be regaining some life. I don't know much about automotive electronics, but I was willing to take any win I could get. I became excited at the prospect of finally ending this awkward encounter. I jiggled the keys again, but once more, the engine stayed dead. Then, my car radio suddenly burst into life at full volume. It started playing the exact same creepy song that was playing in the car. There were no lyrics to the track. It was just a haunting, repetitive tritone loop. The sound filled the cabin and moved through me with a profound sense of wrongness. I realized then that something truly bizarre was happening. The whole time, I was being blinded by the Buick's headlights. Then, without warning, the Buick's lights cut out. At that exact same second, my radio went silent. I was plunged into total darkness, and my eyes struggled to adjust after being stared down by those bright beams. While I was still half blinded, I reached for the ignition one last time. I felt a massive wave of relief when the engine finally roared back to life. But that relief lasted for only a fraction of a second. When my own headlights cut back on and illuminated the road ahead, the Buick was gone. The shock was so violent that I actually screamed out loud. I spun around in my seat, looking out the side and rear windows, expecting to see the taillights of the Buick as it drove away. There was absolutely nothing. The street was empty. It was as if the car had simply vanished into thin air. A massive, heavy car with an old engine should have made a considerable amount of sound, and I surely would have heard it driving past me even in my distracted state. Furthermore, only about 30 seconds had passed between his lights going out and my car starting up. For him to be completely out of sight, he would have had to accelerate like a modern race car. I felt a strange sensation, almost like I was high, even though I don't use drugs. I tried to convince myself that I had suffered a minor stroke or that perhaps my friend in Newport had slipped something into my drink as a prank. But I knew I was as sober as a judge. I am always careful about that, especially with the Rhode Island state troopers constantly looking for Dewey. Because I could find no logical way to explain the event, I fell into that hyperfixation I mentioned earlier. I went back to that specific cul-de-sac multiple times to look for tire marks or hidden driveways. I researched classic car owners in the area and spent hours reading medical journals about blackouts and time loss. I became convinced for a while that I had a condition called syncope, where the heart fails to pump enough oxygen to the brain. It seemed like a serious possibility, so I paid for a full medical checkup. The doctor listened to my heart, checked my blood pressure, and told me I was perfectly healthy. He suggested the episode might have been caused by stress, but I hadn't been feeling particularly stressed at the time. I even ventured into the darker corners of the internet, reading about UFO encounters and missing time, but I eventually realized I was going too far down a rabbit hole. However, I did have one interesting lead during my search for the classic car. I found a man in Middletown who had been trying to sell a 1937 Buick Special for several years. The car was currently a total wreck, but he hoped a collector would want to restore it. I pretended to be a buyer just so I could see it. His son sent me some photos of the rusted-out vehicle. I cannot say for certain that it was the exact same model I saw in the cul-de-sac, but the resemblance was haunting. It is technically impossible for it to be the same car, given the one I saw was in mint condition while this one was a shell of rusted metal. Most people I tell this to suggest the car might have been involved in some past tragedy like a hit and run or a murder. The truth is, the seller didn't know the history. He said his father had purchased the Buick at a police auction and died before he could ever start the restoration. Whatever secrets the car held were buried with his father. I realize I have talked about this for quite a while now. I know that I sound like a fruitcake trying to explain these events. I will leave it to you to decide what happened that night. All I ask is that you don't tell me it was a ghost car. I have heard that for years and I am tired of it. Besides, if I truly believed in ghosts, it would terrify me to know I was that close to one and only barely escaped the encounter.
In the early hours of Sunday, September 17, 1995, 25-year-old Timothy Stone was driving his young family back from a cookout in their native city of Los Angeles. In the vehicle were his 26-year-old partner, Robin Cohen, her 5-year-old son, Christopher, her 3-year-old daughter, Stephanie, and their 2-year-old brother, Joseph. Timothy was not familiar with the Cypress Park neighborhood they were passing through, and since it was nearly 2 in the morning, he did not have a clear view of his surroundings. To make matters worse, many of the streetlights in the area had been shot out, leaving the roads in near total darkness. At a fork in the road, Timothy accidentally turned onto the 2000 block of Isabel Street. This was a dark, narrow, dead-end alley, covered in gang-related graffiti, including one chilling message that read Avenida de los Asesinos, or the Street of Killers. Timothy had taken a wrong turn that led his family into one of the most dangerous areas in California, the territory of a street gang known as the Avenues. This group was notorious as one of Los Angeles' most violent Latino gang sets and had a long history of involvement with the Mexican mafia. Their belief system was built on respect, loyalty, and secrecy, and they met any perceived challenge to their authority with swift, brutal ferocity. When up to 20 members of the gang saw an unknown vehicle entering the heart of their territory, they viewed it as a direct threat to their control. The Avenues were also infamous for committing anti-black hate crimes against innocent residents. Their violence had become so prolific that some observers described their actions as a campaign of ethnic cleansing directed at honest, hard-working members of the black community in Los Angeles. However, as the gang members surrounded the car, it was clear that Timothy and his family were not rival gangsters or undercover officers. They appeared to be a regular Caucasian couple, and the presence of small children in the car made it obvious that this was not a law enforcement operation. Despite this, the gang members began to attack. Timothy and Robin were terrified as the first of several trash cans was smashed into their vehicle. This appeared to be the gang's way of ordering Timothy to leave, and he immediately tried to make an erratic U-turn. Instead of letting them go, other members threw large steel trash cans in front of the wheels to slow the car down, allowing the group to completely surround the family. Both Timothy and Robin pleaded with the men to let them pass. The gang members refused, demanding to know why the couple was in their neighborhood. Timothy apologized repeatedly, but his pleas were ignored. One of the gang members then produced a pistol, aimed it directly at Timothy's face, and threatened to shoot him. In a state of total panic, Timothy decided to accelerate, driving into the human roadblock in a desperate attempt to escape. By that time, multiple gang members were armed, and as the car moved forward, they fired their weapons into the windshield. Numerous bullets ripped through the car, hitting both the upholstery and the passengers inside. One bullet struck 3-year-old Stephanie in the head while she was being held in her mother's arms. Her 2-year-old brother Joseph was hit in the left foot, and a bullet grazed Timothy's back. The family managed to drive away and rushed to the hospital, hoping the children could be saved. While Joseph eventually made a full recovery, medical staff were unable to revive young Stephanie. She passed away just a few hours later. Her grieving parents were only a few feet away, behind a closed door, when her time of death was officially called. The murder of the young girl sparked widespread anger across the country. Former President Bill Clinton reflected the national mood, stating that a family had taken a single wrong turn. Because they were in the wrong place, gang members believed they had the right to shoot at them and kill an innocent child. Many people struggled to understand how such a senseless killing could happen. As journalists began investigating Cypress Park, the public learned about the daily horrors faced by the neighborhood's residents. Innocent people were frequently caught in the crossfire of gang wars. The gang's initiation rites often required new members to shoot at civilians to prove their loyalty. It was a place where a simple trip to the store for milk could result in death. This occurred for no reason other than being randomly chosen. Many Americans were shocked that such violence was happening in their own country, but for those living in the area, it was a daily reality. Stephanie Cohen was laid to rest a week later. 12 Los Angeles police officers served as an honor guard, and 4 generations of the Cohen family gathered at the Church of the Recessional in Glendale. During the service, a cousin referred to Stephanie as an angel. By the time of the funeral, the investigation into her killers was nearly finished. Police had profiles on the local gang members and were focused on finding the specific gunman. Shortly after, 28-year-old Anthony Gabriel Rodriguez, 22-year-old Manuel Rosales Jr., and 18-year-old Hugo David Gomez were arrested. They were charged with the attack on the family that had simply been unlucky enough to take a wrong turn. At the conclusion of their trial on August 1, 1997, a judge sentenced all 3 men to 54 years to life in state prison. They were sent to separate facilities located on opposite sides of California. The public felt a sense of relief that justice had been served for Stephanie. However, the United States has continued to struggle with violent gang activity in many major cities. With cities like St. Louis and Baltimore maintaining high murder rates, there is a persistent concern that other innocent families might one day find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. They may face similar senseless violence.
I have a story to share that has truly traumatized me for quite a while now. I feel like this is a good place to tell it because I need to get it out. I am from New Zealand and over here. We have the occasional missing person or a scary murder case, but it is otherwise a very safe country where not much goes on. Because of that, as a 19-year-old girl, I always felt comfortable walking the streets at night or going on hikes alone. Everyone generally looks out for one another. You don't grow up expecting danger in the woods. This happened in the summer of 2019. My boyfriend and I were headed out on a picnic date to a spot we had visited many times. It is called the Karakariki Track. It sits at the end of a very long, windy and rural farm road off of the state highway. To get there, you have to drive for about 15 minutes. You travel deep along a stretch of farmland. At the very end, there is a large cul-de-sac and a massive surrounding farm. The owners of the farm have left the land open to the public. It is a reserve because it is filled with beautiful native trees and wildlife. About a 15-minute walk from the parking lot, there is a small waterfall where you can go swimming. The track is very popular because it is one of the closest swimming spots to Hamilton, the nearest city. It is a scenic and beautiful place where you cross footbridges and pass by creek beds. Farmers still work the land, so there are fenced-off areas the public can enter while the agricultural work continues. On this particular day, my boyfriend and I were really happy. The parking lot was completely empty. It was a super hot summer's day, which was rare for that time, and we felt lucky to have the place to ourselves. As we arrived, we saw the local farmer crossing through the gate on a quad bike with his cows. He was an older man we had spoken to before, since we were regular visitors. He smiled and waved at us as he went about his work. We set off toward the waterfall, crossing a footbridge and passing through a large paddock full of cows. The track there is quite narrow, with the creek sitting right next to it down a steep bank, so you have to be careful where you step. We reached the waterfall. We decided against swimming because we realized we hadn't brought any towels. We turned around and headed back toward the car park. On our way back, we decided to take a small detour. We went down a steep gravel-off ramp from the track. This led to a more private, tree-covered area right by the water. We were enjoying the quiet, kissing and relaxing. I was lying on my tummy reading a book while my boyfriend sat up playing on his phone, rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We were there for about 10 minutes. I turned my head and glanced up the gravel path. Way up on a hill, through one of the farmer's gates, I saw a large man on a quad bike. I didn't recognize him. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, staring down at my boyfriend and me. I don't even want to think about how long he had been watching us before I noticed him. I quietly told my boyfriend what I saw, which made him turn to look as well. As soon as the man realized we were both looking at him, he opened the gate. He started driving down the hill toward us. We immediately got up to leave. We didn't want to have an awkward conversation with a farmer about being romantic on his land. That is what we assumed was about to happen. However, the situation was much worse than a simple scolding. The man came down the track and drove his quad into the creek. He left the engine running while it sat in the water and climbed off. He started talking to himself loudly, saying over and over that he had messed up his quad. He said he had damaged his engine. He seemed agitated before he even got near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave when the man began heading toward us. He didn't offer any small talk or a friendly greeting. Instead, he immediately asked us if we had seen any fish, explaining that he was looking for some fish to kill. My boyfriend calmly responded that there were no fish in that creek because it was fresh water, suggesting that the man might have better luck trying to catch some eels instead. This suggestion sent the man into a sudden fit of anger. He yelled that he didn't want any effing eels and repeated that he wanted to kill some fish. I made a point not to look the guy in the eye. I didn't want to draw the conversation toward myself because I was already extremely freaked out. I didn't want him to notice my fear. My boyfriend was always the calmer, stronger one in situations like this. But for a brief second, I did look at the man's face. I noticed it looked slightly deformed. Since I work in aged care, I thought it might be Bell's palsy. As I stood back up from tying my shoelace, I noticed something terrifying. There was a pistol tucked into the man's waist. I want to emphasize how shocking this was. That was the first and last time I have ever seen a real-life handgun. It is incredibly hard to get a firearm in New Zealand, especially after the strict regulations following the Christchurch shooting. To make matters worse, he didn't just have one. He was waving a second pistol around in his hand as he talked to my boyfriend about killing fish. He would aim it down at the creek and swing it around. My boyfriend gave me a look that I can only describe as stern. That single look spoke a million words to me. He nodded toward the hill leading back to the track. I grabbed our 2 bags and faked a check of my phone. I told the man that our family was waiting for us back at the car park and we had to go. He completely ignored what I said. Instead, he made a comment about how I had a cool hat on, saying something completely irrelevant to the situation. I said a quick goodbye. I started making my way up the hill. In my mind, I was terrified. I didn't want to look back for fear of seeing my boyfriend get shot. I knew our best bet was for me to get up the hill onto the narrow path where the quad bike couldn't follow, then sprint toward the farmer's house. As I was walking away, the man told my boyfriend that he had a really pretty girl. It felt like all the dark intentions I didn't want to believe were confirmed. I honestly felt like I was going to die. My boyfriend, remaining brave, gave a quick thanks and said we would be off now, then followed me up the hill. Even as we moved away, the man kept talking as if the conversation was still going on. He just stood there, gun in hand, watching us leave. As soon as we were out of his sight, we sprinted as fast as we could all the way back to the car park. When we got there, we noticed empty gun shells. There were over 10 shells scattered on the ground. We ran into 2 girls in bikinis who were arriving and quickly informed them about the man and the gun. They got into their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to see if he knew who the man was, but the farmers weren't home anymore. The thought of those guns still haunts me. They looked old and rusty. My boyfriend suggested they might have been illegal heirlooms handed down to him. This incident has stayed with me for years. My boyfriend and I haven't been able to return to that spot, which is heartbreaking because it's where we had our first date. For about a year afterward, I had to drive past the road leading to that track during my commute, and it always made me feel physically sick. I could have lost my life or my partner that day. I am forever grateful for the man my boyfriend is. He was able to stay calm and lead us away, He communicated exactly what I needed to do through just a look. He told me afterward that he was ready to die if he had to. Knowing the man had been watching us from the hill and hearing his compliment made it clear that he had very scary intentions. This experience has changed me. I am much more fearful now when I travel into the bush alone, something I had done happily my entire life.
The town I lived in has developed a massive amount since the time of this story. When this happened, there were many factories spread out across the landscape with vast, empty stretches of land sitting between them. A Walmart was being built in the area at the time, but the project had barely started and was mostly just a skeleton of construction. While a main highway ran through the center of town, my mother generally avoided it. The traffic was consistently heavy and frustrating. Instead, we would travel along the side streets, which were incredibly desolate and lacked any significant street lighting. These roads were so quiet and isolated that it was rare to see another car. I cannot quite remember where we were coming from on that particular evening, but I was in the car with my mother and my younger brother, who is 3 years younger than me. My mother was behind the wheel. I was sitting in the front passenger seat, and my brother was buckled in directly behind me. My mother is truly the sweetest person I know, but she has always been very adamant about a specific safety rule. She would never stop to help a person on the side of the road or pick up a stranger, especially when her children were in the vehicle with her. However, she was not heartless. She always called the police. She did this so that professional help could be dispatched to the person in need. It was roughly 9 p.m. as we were making our way home. As we drove, my mother and I both spotted a vehicle. It was on the passenger side of the road with its hood propped up. It seemed like a completely ordinary breakdown, and my mother slowed the car down slightly out of caution. Because it was so dark, she was careful. She did not want to risk accidentally hitting someone who might be leaning over the engine or working on the car. Just as we drew level, a man suddenly stepped out from around the raised hood and moved toward us. He moved toward the street, frantically waving his arms to flag us down. I do not have a very clear memory of what the man looked like because I was not paying much attention at first. The darkness made it difficult to see his features. I do remember feeling a sense of guilt, thinking it was a shame that we were not going to stop and see what he required. The man moved further out. He moved into the middle of the road to continue waving at us. But as we passed, we noticed that there was nobody else inside his car. My mother quickly swerved the car around him to stay on the road. She immediately instructed my brother to search for her phone inside her purse, which was sitting on the floorboard between the front and back seats. When I turned to look at my mother, I saw her checking the mirror. Her face suddenly went completely white and her eyes grew wide with a look of pure terror. Without warning, she slammed her foot down on the accelerator, causing the car to surge forward. This was incredibly out of character. She was usually very careful about sticking to the speed limit. At that moment, I realized something was terribly wrong. Her voice became high-pitched and strained with panic as she repeatedly asked my brother if he had the phone. I began yelling at her to tell me what was happening, and the sheer chaos of the moment began to freak my brother out. Being so young, he started crying and struggled to find the phone in the dark. My mother kept her eyes glued to the road ahead but continued to glance nervously at the mirror, finally stating that the man was following us. I did not fully understand the situation, but the tension was clear. The tension in the car made it clear that we were in danger. My mother began speeding toward the highway, and fortunately, the road was clear of traffic. When I looked out the back window, I saw a car. It was driving aggressively, passing other vehicles in an attempt to keep pace with my mother's car. I asked her where she was taking us, and she explained that she was heading directly to the police station for safety. As we neared our destination, my mother gave us very specific instructions. She told me that the moment she brought the car to a stop, I needed to jump out, grab my brother from the back seat, and run. She planned to meet us on the other side of the car so we could enter the station together. She pulled up right in front of the police station and was so hurried that she shifted into park early. The car had not even come to a full stop. I threw my door open as fast as I could and grabbed my brother, who had already managed to unlatch his own door. I took off in a sprint. I was holding my brother with one hand and my mother with the other as we rushed toward the entrance. Once we were finally inside and speaking with a police officer, I began to understand the full extent. My mother told the officer that as soon as we had passed the man with the broken-down car, he had quickly ran to the front of his vehicle and slammed the hood shut. He then jumped in and sped after us. That was the moment my mother knew that this guy had horrible intentions for us. She described how he kept trying to speed up to get on the side of our car. She was able to increase her speed to avoid that. According to my mother, the man stopped following her the moment she turned toward the police station. She gave the officers the best description she could of the man. However, because everything happened so fast, she did not get a license plate number. I am pretty sure the police never found him. I am also not sure what the guy had planned for us. If we had actually stopped to help, I know that it was nothing good.
No matter how much I wish it wasn't the case, I must insist that this story is completely true. I was not drunk, nor was I under the influence of any drugs. Neither was my friend. I truly fear his state of mind might have been permanently altered due to his terrifying experience with these beings. Secondly, I like to consider myself a rational thinking type of person with years of experience hunting and hiking. I have seen all kinds of local fauna and flora throughout my life, so I'm confident that I did not confuse what I saw for something entirely different or common to the area. It all started then. I went to a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. He was turning 18, and I was already 18 myself. His uncle, a man even more native to the land than myself, was 27. We can call him James. I finally arrived at his house at about 4 p.m. that night on January 25th. Since he effectively lived in the middle of nowhere at the foothills of the Rockies, I was keen on bringing something with me, in case I ran into some trouble like a bear or a mountain lion. So I brought along my .357 Magnum and some binoculars, just in case my friend wanted to try and hunt some coyotes with his rifle. We started doing our normal routine for most of the day, which included playing games on his computer, watching some TV, and just chilling out while talking about school. And his parents were away on a business trip. They had left James and his uncle the house to themselves. The thing that James loved the most in the world was easily his dogs. He had 2 chocolate labs and a golden retriever. The retriever was fairly old. This being Wyoming, where people do not really give a hoot about strict leashes, the dogs were left out all day. They came and went as they pleased back to his house. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we heard his dogs begin barking at something off in the distance. At this point, the sun was long gone, but the full moon provided an amazing amount of light against the winter landscape. I looked through the window. Even with the moon shining brightly against the white snow, I could not see anything up to the tree line that was nearly a mile away. I told James that there was nothing out there. James whispered back. He asked if I was sure, and noted that the dogs did not even bark at deer anymore. The whole situation felt very weird. Fast forward an hour, and his dogs had not been heard or seen since. His uncle was buzzed and watching something on their huge TV, but James was beginning to worry that something had happened to his dogs. Now, wolves can still be very dangerous in the Rockies and take down dogs. This was the moment where I started to get anxious, partly because he wanted to get his dogs back, and partly because wolves sometimes kill sheep, or even cows. If they were desperate, they would take us. Even still, those dogs were his family, so we grabbed our guns and we headed outside. We were armed with heavy clothing, as well as my .357, the binoculars, and his .223 rifle. We braced ourselves and headed out. In the Wyoming winter, with temperatures reaching 20 degrees below freezing, we went in the direction of where we last saw his dogs. The whole time we walked toward the tree line, my veins were flooded with adrenaline. It was the same feeling I got every time I hunted, but tonight, we definitely were not the hunters. We were about 300 yards away from the tree line when James suddenly stopped. I almost ran into him. He just stared at the tree line. He kept whispering for me to look at the trees. Slowly, He raised his left index finger towards the foothills of the mountains. He readied his rifle and pointed it towards them. I noticed at this point that his breathing was extremely rapid and raspy, like he had just witnessed a fatal car crash right in front of him. At that point, I honestly did not know what he saw. I scanned the tree line over and over. I crouched down to sit on the snow and used the binoculars towards where he pointed. It took me about 30 seconds, but eventually I saw what scared him. There was something out there, and it was not human, and it was not his dogs. Something on 4 legs came out from behind a tree at the edge of the forest. It was 3 feet tall. At first I assumed it was a wolf, or maybe even a small bear. A few seconds later, several more of these things came out of the woods. I did not pause to try and count them exactly. There were at least 6 or 7, and who knows how many more were still hiding in the trees. We watched them slowly walk out of the trees for several minutes. These animals seemed strangely cautious or slow. Then they eventually stopped as a howl from a dog or wolf came out from behind us. It was far enough away for us to not worry, but close enough for the unknown animals out there to hear. I looked back through the binoculars and could almost make out the general texture of these creatures. They were now about 275 yards away. They looked pale and thin. They still appeared to be like wolves. My heart began to race when I saw what they did next. These things, whatever they were, picked up their pace fast, reaching speeds of what looked like 15 to 20 miles per hour, closing the distance. This was almost right at us. After a minute or so, James lost his nerve and tried to run away. I grabbed him and threw him on the ground as he started to run, but this caught them. The beasts stopped. James and I, frozen with fear, sat down in the snow with our weapons ready. I almost lost it as well when I noticed that the eyes of these things reflected the moonlight. They were orange in color. They did not really glow like in some stories of cryptids. They were more piercing and reflective. We stared at them, and they stared back at us for what seemed like hours. Then one of these creatures stood up on its back legs. At this moment, all of my knowledge on hunting and animals was rendered meaningless. I knew some animals could stand, but never for very long. I audibly counted to see how long it stayed like that. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then James screamed and pointed his .223 to the right. I looked and saw a creature on the left begin to run. Dumbfounded, I turned my attention to the rest of them and told James to keep watching the one that ran away. I did a quick count of the ones that remained, the ones staring us down. There were only 4. My heart pounded out of my chest because there was no way we could have lost something so large on these plains. They are completely flat and covered in snow. I saw it. It was crouched down and trying not to be seen. I realized how smart these things were, much smarter than I would have ever expected. These things were flanking us, I whispered to James, my suspicion. He confirmed he had the same thought. I made up a quick plan in my head and relayed the best course of action to James. I told him to start backing away slowly while maintaining eye contact. As soon as I finished telling him my idea, I did another quick count. Now there were only 3 pairs of orange eyes. Another one had gone somewhere. The one that first stood was walking towards us. I helped James up and told him to keep an eye on our right side while I looked to the left. We backed away, but these beasts walked with us, maintaining their distance the whole time. Eventually, we were only about 100 yards from his house before we turned and ran to his front door. We booked it towards his porch lights, no longer caring to be coy about the situation. Foolishly, I stopped 50 feet short of the porch and turned around. Maybe it was curiosity, but I regretted it the moment I did it. My body seized up the moment I saw it. Those creatures stopped. With the creatures ever so slightly illuminated by the porch lights, I realized that these things seemed otherworldly. They were tall, probably 6 or 7 feet, and they were insanely thin and lanky. They were so pale, and they stared right back with those intense orange eyes from before. I just looked back, feeling less afraid but more curious. A few seconds later, James screamed at me. I shook off my confusion and raced toward his place. I jumped inside and bolted the door, all while his drunk uncle swore at us for making too much noise. I looked out of the windows with my gun in hand, but I did not see a thing. There was nothing but fresh tracks. I pulled the curtains back and we heard the strangest noise ever. It sounded like a dog's howl, but it repeated in pulses like it was coming from a Siamang gibbon, using different pitches and tones. The uncle looked like he instantly sobered up after hearing it. He started locking all the doors and windows in the house. To our surprise, all of James's dogs were back, but they were very frightened and confused, cowering in a corner. We watched through the windows. We stayed up for almost the entire night until I eventually needed to fall asleep. We never had any other problems since that night. Whatever these things were, they were fast, smart, and new to me. It looked like some strange dogman straight from tribal legend. I am not a superstitious type of guy, but I hope it was somehow just a dream, even if my friend and his uncle recall it.